Yep, ready now.
Okay, well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the third in our series of webinars initiated by the Greater Adelaide Regional Organisation of Councils, otherwise known as GAROC, to discuss the vital and growing role that local government can play as our businesses and communities right across South Australia try to rebuild in the wake of COVID-19. Now today, this is the third, as I said, and our focus is on libraries and the use of library infrastructure, facilities, services and business supports and the role they can and should play as part of our community recovery. But before we start our discussion today, I would like to acknowledge that, albeit virtually, many of us are meeting on the land of the Kaurna people, and we acknowledge their and pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. And also, as an FYI, this Zoom webinar is being recorded and will be made available to all LGA members on the LGA website. There you go. And you can see the details there. So if you've missed any of it or you want to refer somebody to it after today, that's where to head. And while we still have a number of webinars scheduled for the coming weeks, I know that GAROC is keen to hear from you if there are specific areas that you would like us to explore and discuss that we don't already have on our list. So ladies and gentlemen, today we're looking at the role of public libraries across South Australia, more than 130 across regional and metro SA, offering a diverse range of services and playing a very important role, as we know, within our local communities. But as we know, COVID-19 has had a profound impact right across the country, and communities have shut down, families have been locked away, and library life, has been far from normal. The aim of this webinar is to try and provide some insights into, and potentially we hope some answers, into how libraries and local councils can reflect on what they do best, how they've adapted during COVID-19 and the role they can play in rebuilding social resilience and supporting local communities and businesses. Now we have a terrific panel for our chat today. Joining us will be Ben Footner, the President of Public Libraries SA and Manager of Library Services for the City of Prospect. Hello, Ben. Joe Cooper, Manager Community Capacity at the City of Salisbury. Morning, Joe. Sue McKerracher, the CEO of the Australian Library and Information Association. Morning, Sue. And Katherine Russell, Senior Policy Officer with the LGA. Morning to you all. And I would very much encourage all of you to get involved this morning. If you have a comment or like to share some thoughts on what has or hasn't worked in your council or some of the challenges that you've been facing, please jump online and join the conversation. But before we get underway this morning, I wanted to ask GAROC Chair and Gawler Mayor Karen Redman to remind us why GAROC is driving this webinar series and why discussing the role of libraries is so important. Morning, Karen.
Good morning, Leigh, and good morning everyone that's here with us today. Yeah, thank you. I think GAROC, as a committee of the LGA, saw this particular subject as really, really important. They're all important: main streets, business recovery, but also social recovery. So the interesting thing about libraries is we've all got a library, or nearly all of us. Even our tiny little communities in our country towns have little satellite libraries. So extraordinary community spaces that have such versatility to them. And so we were really keen to hear what people's ideas were, what their thoughts were about the role of a simple library, their spectacular spaces, and how they can help drive this recovery. Because we're hearing, and you mentioned it, you know, how lucky we are not to be in Victoria. But I've got family, I've got a daughter in Victoria as well, and I can tell you it's not a happy place at the moment. It's a worrying place. And so, you know, how do we actually navigate through this very challenging time? But what an opportunity for local government as well. So we've taken this very seriously as a committee, and I'm really pleased that we're getting such strong engagement. And as you said, I'm really keen to hear, and as are all the committee members and LGA, of, you know, what interaction we're going to get today and all the really good ideas that people hopefully will share, because that's what it's about. Local government have an incredible role to play in this process as we go through it. But thank you, Leigh, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Karen, really appreciate it. Well, firstly, can I go back to our panel and can I ask each of you briefly, just to give us a bit of an intro to your role within your organisation. Ben, do you want to kick off for us?
Yep, so I'm the manager of library services at the City of Prospect. We've got a nice new library that's only 6 months old there on Prospect Road, which has been really enjoyable to work towards and then work in. I'm also volunteer as president of Public Libraries South Australia, which is the association that represents the interests of public libraries, in South Australia. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks, Ben. What about you, Joe? Life in Salisbury.
Hi everybody, my role is the Manager of Community Capacity and Learning, which involves working with an amazing team who are responsible for delivering services and programs to libraries and community centres. 5 of those are library sites, the remainder are the community centres. And like Ben, I'm part of the Plaza Executive for Libraries in South Australia and the Standing Committee for the Libraries Board.
Okay. Joe, your audio was a little waffly, but I'm hoping that's just my aging ears. So you might want to front up to your computer. Sue, what about you? Tell us about ALIA.
I'm the CEO of the Australian Library and Information Association. It's a fabulous job. It means working with all sorts of libraries, school libraries, university libraries, but the most visible area that we work with, of course, are public libraries. And within our association, we have the Australian Public Library Alliance, which brings together all of these amazing institutions in one kind of group. And it's amazing to see how our libraries work together in informal networks across the nation, as well as informal networks at the state level.
Thanks, Sue. And Katherine, rather.
Hi, Leigh. Yes, I'm a Senior Policy Officer here at the LGA, and one of the areas that I'm responsible for is libraries. And so I am an LGA representative on the Public Libraries Standing Committee, but also during the COVID crisis, I also worked on a secondment really for 5 weeks in the Local Government Functional Support Group. We worked very hard with libraries during that process, establishing a project team. And so we've sort of seen more about how libraries can work during the COVID crisis as well. So had that sort of dual role.
Fabulous. Okay, Ben, let's kick off with you. As I said, more than 130 libraries across South Australia of all shapes and sizes, and you're based at the City of Prospect, which has a pretty whizzy one. As President of Public Libraries SA, what is it that you think libraries do so well in our state? And let me preface this by saying I want to look at what we do well, what we've been battling with during COVID-19, what are some of the challenges. This is not all for you, Ben, by the way. But as we work through this discussion, but what are the opportunities? Because I, as an outsider, really believe there are some opportunities. But Ben, as I said, to go back to you, what is it you think that we do so well in this state with our libraries?
Well, I think the thing we do quite so well here, particularly in South Australia, is our level of cooperation and collaboration across the sector. So it's a level that I think is unmatched by any other sector in local government, and it's also something that our interstate counterparts are still yet to achieve. The one card system is the most obvious manifestation of this, and that's an achievement in collaboration that I still don't think is fully understood or appreciated by the broader sector and even the general public. But that's only the most recent example of libraries in this state collaborating for the benefit of communities. So we have operated a shared procurement model for many, many, many years, a couple of decades now, which is effectively purchasing our stock together to make our dollar go further. And we've also got histories of cooperating with shared subscriptions of online services, which has saved ratepayers thousands of dollars over many years, and also ensures a level of consistency and equity across the state. So, and really that's what the collaboration we have in South Australia achieves. Like, we have managed to sort of achieve a situation here in South Australia where no matter where you live, how regional you live, or what community you live in, you can walk into any library and get access to the same core services. So that's access to any item anywhere in any library in the state, and also access to the same online services, which is ebook and e-magazine collections and e-learning resources as well. So that is really our strength here in South Australia and something we're all very proud of. Yeah.
And let me throw a spanner in the works. That sounds fabulous for all of those people who are currently using library services. I think one of the big challenges is how do you speak to those people who aren't using them? So let's come to that in a minute. Jo, you have a really active library within your community hub, which is an interesting concept at Salisbury. How have you been impacted by COVID-19?
Yes, our Salisbury Community Hub opened in December last year, so that brought all of the council services together into the one building. It's our flagship library site, being the largest, or what we used to call our central library. Like all library services in South Australia and Australia-wide, were impacted by the closure, which was announced, and then we very quickly closed. I believe the date was the 25th of March that we closed. It meant that we had to move quickly to pivot our alternative service delivery for our community, in line with the restrictions, of course. So we worked with our internal teams of council to make sure we had our risk assessments in place. All of our capability was put into moving towards that as quickly as we could, so that there was, of course we knew there was an interruption, but we wanted to deliver those services to our community in a different way. So you've probably heard around the click and collect, the home delivery services, online services and technology. One of the things we found was that we were somewhat overwhelmed with the number of inquiries that we received, the phone calls that were coming through, the online and socials, which meant that our resourcing was impacted. So whilst there may have been a perception from the community that the libraries were closed, we're in fact busier than ever. We then, as I mentioned, worked with our internal teams to make sure we had a consistent message of what services were available. Our community, we found out very quickly, definitely missed the ability to use the spaces, access technology and our programs. We had lots of services within local government. We had big plans for 2020, which did not eventuate.
Well, not yet.
Yes, on the upside, the community has been really resilient and adapted well to the alternative services that we put in place and that we offered, and we've received lots of positive feedback.
Terrific, thanks, Jo. So the library and information services sector is relatively small, but as we know, a very highly qualified workforce. 27,500 workers across the sector, I believe. From the members, what sorts of, and from a national perspective, what sort of COVID-19 related concerns are you hearing?
Well, I think to start with, to say that we're a very small group of people, but massive reach. So something like 111 million visits to public libraries every year and 9 million registered users. So it's a massive market share. If you had a supermarket group and you had that kind of market share, you'd be very pleased. The thing that I've found working with libraries is that library staff are focused on their communities, so that their own concerns come second. It's about the community, and that's really come to the fore during COVID-19. So there was a reluctant acceptance that we had to close for the safety of our communities, but there was also a real understanding that this was leaving a huge gap for some people. And I think it was really on two major fronts. The first was the lack of access to technology. And particularly when people were trying to talk to Centrelink, were trying to get online, to do things. Yeah. There are 2.5 million Australians who are not online. And government services don't factor in that element. Libraries are there as the pickup for this group. The other side of it was loneliness. Yeah. On mental health. We've just done a survey, and the first 500 responses, 40% of the people responding to that said that with their library closing, what they most missed was being around other people. I think the library's role in mental health and loneliness is something we'd always known about. We'd never put a figure on it. But the compounded effect of COVID-19 lockdown means we are really keen to get people back into those libraries.
Yeah, and they need them. Katherine, can I ask you from the LGA's perspective, a bit of a Dorothy Dixer. So how important is the role of libraries across South Australia in supporting local communities, particularly now?
Well, it's been a challenging time for libraries through the COVID-19 crisis. As I said, I was working out of the local government functional support group for a few weeks, and the role of that group is to support councils in all different aspects of their work in negotiating the COVID crisis. And so through that, we established what they call an incident project team of library managers, and also we had two representatives from the Public Library Service, which is the state government arm that helps libraries. And I guess what that revealed, there was lots of interest in being part of that group, and they met regularly, and they provided a lot of support to me in providing in turn support to libraries around the state. So that process was really interesting in revealing what a great, what a unified network of libraries it is as well, and how keen everyone is to help one another. So the fact that libraries were one of the first services that government looked at reopening also really revealed the importance of libraries to the community, but also to government, I think. And so we worked very hard, the LGA through the functional support group worked very hard in supporting managers in understanding the new restrictions and what they meant for them, but also positioning libraries in the recovery. And as Sue alluded to, there are a lot of households in Australia that don't, in South Australia, 17.5% of households don't have access to the internet.
Wow.
So, which is a lot. And so that was obviously a service that was really missed. But the closure of libraries really highlighted, I think to the government, but to the community in general, what an important service they are. Once it's taken away, it's, people realise what they're missing out on. So it's not just the access to books and so on, but also the access to internet, to computers, to social interaction, and to all those services that libraries provide. So, I think libraries obviously are very important to councils generally, and in turn to the LGA.
Yeah, and look, some general questions to all of you on the panel now. As we've seen, so the libraries were shut down, and I think that really had a bite. How have we seen staff responding? And Jo, you spoke about it before, pick up, take away, a whole range of services. What other things have we seen in ways that libraries have adapted?
Online programming's been a massive one, and there's been staff in all libraries that probably had no experience in actually delivering online programming, who within the space of a week or two were delivering story times and rhyme times, etc., via social media platforms. So that's probably been a big thing to come out of this crisis. There's been other programming, author talks, as the closures have gone on, that have really expanded, and some of those things may well continue once this is all over, because of the reach that we've been able to achieve by doing that. So that would be one big one that I would highlight, yeah.
Ben, you raise a very good point, because, and that buzzword at the moment is everybody's pivoting, you have to pivot, pirouette, do whatever. But does it come back potentially to bite you? Because now that we've given people a taste of, these new services, one would think be an expectation that, well, gee, that was pretty good. I'd like some more of that. Is that going to present some challenges?
We have talked about this quite extensively as a network, and I would actually say no, it's more of an opportunity, because much of what was delivered was an extension of the services that were already in place. So, for example, the click and collect was already an extension of the hold service, which happens in-house within the library locations. So what it has done is just either highlighted those services that we deliver, and yes, it was about adapting and changing that. Longer term, that's an individual decision of different councils as to whether they continue those services. But as we move back to more of normal service delivery, it means that we have, number one, marketed to people who maybe weren't aware of the services that were available, and another one of those would be the home delivery. Is we can then transfer customers who have issues with mobility or access to libraries to the home delivery service. But we can also then, the marketing to the people who didn't realise what we offer. I mentioned earlier about the telephone calls. A large number of what we noticed was the phone calls that were coming in for advisory services. So we touched on the technology. People are asking, how do we access these services from home? So it's not just about the internet access, of course that's absolutely required. And also you need the device to be able to access the services, but it's how do we do it? So our staff spend a great deal of time on the phone to people, either assisting them with access to our services via online service delivery, so via our web pages, or to other services. So we talk about the people who were trying to get onto MyGov. And of course, the world didn't stand still. It wasn't just the JobKeeper and JobSeeker. It was people who were accessing all those services which they needed to on an ongoing basis.
Jay, you raise some very good points. And I think, and again, I come to all of these conversations as somebody who doesn't work within local government and as a rudimentary outsider. I think it would be a real shame if there were libraries who decided not to stick with some of these programs, because I think there's a real opportunity to market the new library, I think, for, the 2020. So I would hope that there would be, councils right across South Australia that would consider that long and hard. I wanted to talk to you, and I was intrigued to have a look at the report, the Hudson House report, The Value of Library Study, that came out in Feb 2020. Katherine, let's talk through that. It was a survey of 1,000 South Australian adults, library managers and state government agencies, and 77% of those surveyed rated services as important. I want to put this question to the panel. What would we agree are a library's key roles? Just to get some clarity, and I'll put my hand up. I haven't been in a library since my kids were little and I went to story time. And I think there's a real gap in the market between the mummy market and the retiree market. And I think about, kids like my teenage kids. It's a great opportunity. One of the challenges and opportunities, I think, from COVID is going to be how we get that mob in. So can I ask all of you, what do you think of the library's key roles?
Well, Leigh, can I say from a national perspective, we talk about literacy, especially early literacy, lifelong learning, internet connection. But the other thing we talk about is their economic role, their role in supporting local economies and particularly the creative industries. And I just want to squeeze in here something I would have said in answer to the last question.
Yeah.
We were able to organise an agreement, a copyright agreement with the Australian Publishers Association and the Society of Authors to enable virtual story times to happen in public libraries. What this did was it actually supported Australian authors. And there are a lot of local authors who are struggling at this time, who were able then to promote their online programs to libraries who bought those. So there's money going through the economy as a result of what public libraries are doing. The other thing is that you mentioned earlier, Leigh, how do we get people in who aren't traditional library users? The reach that we've created by posting story times to Facebook and to our YouTube channels, we're getting grandparents, parents leaping into that, and they're discovering the library. So I know Joe and Ben and everyone are going to have a lot more users when they come back.
Yeah, and don't go backwards. Don't go backward. Let's grasp what's being thrown into our laps. And I was just, when I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, obviously, access to library materials and equipment. Oh, I jumped back a bit. I'm starting to wonder whether the term library is actually a bit of a misnomer for what we now have, because I think there's such a broad and rich offering. I know we'll never get rid of the title, but I wonder whether we need to flesh that out in more. But anyway, I think access to technology, obviously access to, fabulous books and material, access to meeting areas, but also, and I think we've touched on it, that what I think libraries sometimes underplay is that enormous value of the social interaction, regardless of what you're there for. What do you think?
Well, our library, and we've put it in quite a central location in Prospect, which is having some wonderful success, which I'm happy to go into detail if we would like. But yeah. I like to think of the modern library as almost an indoor town square. So it's actually a lot of what a library does is about the place and the way it makes people feel when they walk in the door. And the opportunities that they have to either interact with other people or to discover and learn things that they didn't expect to when they walked in. and they'll walk out with something that they didn't expect to walk out with. That might be a piece of knowledge, that might be a new friendship, that might be, a new interest, a new hobby. But really, libraries these days, I think, are in the business of well-being, and that really is a buzzword at the moment. But we are the total facility that already exists that covers off on that goal.
Yeah. And it's interesting because that whole development of a community hub and putting libraries not in some cloistered confines at the back of the council building, but actually getting the library out into the middle of where the community is, where the retail sector is, where the hospitality sector is. Is that a change that we need to push for more of?
Yes, I think, and there's been a couple of really important examples in South Australia. Prospect is one, Joe's at Salisbury is another, where councils have made the conscious decision to redevelop their libraries in their village heart, effectively, and that has had huge impact, or has allowed councils to achieve all of their strategic goals for their communities. It takes the library out of the usual sort of community development goals, and also finally acknowledges that we actually have a role to play even in things like economic development. I mean, it comes right down to, as an example, the coffee shop next door to us on Prospect Road. They have said to us that they used to only get one rush in the morning. Since we've moved to Prospect Road, they now get an after-school rush as well. So
I hope you're getting a kickback.
So might get a few cents off my coffee when I go over there every now and then. but
Jane, what about up in Salisbury? What's been the reaction up there with your community? Is it different since it's opened?
Oh, absolutely. It's as Ben mentions, the library itself is the centre point. I believe it's the glue that sticks all the services together, because when people come into libraries, they come in, as Ben said, sometimes for an experience or a particular service. They might also be there for the council services as well. They come in for a particular reason, but it's about discovery of other things. It's also a really good equaliser, because we're not expecting things of people when they come into libraries. It's not like retail where if you go into a coffee shop, you're expected to purchase a cup of coffee. You can come into a library for no reason at all, or for a reason. And so libraries, public libraries especially, have a long history of partnering and referral with lots of other departments and NGOs. So we look at everything as, again, Ben mentioned, from economic development, but also public health policy. So libraries have always facilitated and worked with other government departments on things like immunisation programs, maternal health, financial counselling. We work with the ATO, we provide social supports through Relationships Australia and other organisations. Digital services, we've already talked about MyGov and the training that happens for the digital access.
That social equity issue is a really good one, isn't it, Jo?
Yeah.
Anyone can come into a library. It doesn't matter where you come, what you're there for or how much money you have. It's equality of access, and that's what the One Card Network does too, the equality of access around South Australia.
I wonder too whether this new sort of feel makes the playing field a bit more equitable, where people feel like they're not walking in for a service but feel like they're part of it, and does that then follow that there is room to encourage people to tell you what they want rather than what you're curating and giving them? Anne, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. And I think having a really quality facility to provide to a community for free actually reinforces an individual's feeling of self-worth, that even when they're down on their luck or are experiencing a level of discrimination potentially in a community, or are really struggling economically, that they can walk into a facility like Joe's got at Salisbury and know that they're allowed to be in there and it's there for them. Like that's from a base psychological perspective, that's a really important thing. And I think it's a really big statement that a council can make to their community on the value of their community's well-being by providing a wonderful, beautiful, inspiring facility for their community to use. So,
Sue, I know you look like you wanted to say something to that.
Well, I do, because I want to say that around the world, governments are investing in public libraries as a support for their communities. So it's both about well-being, but it's also about ambition and signalling what this community is about. And I just want to say thank you to all of the local government people on this call who have made that investment, because it is the local governments that are coming to the table on this and making that happen. And we talk to architects all the time who are involved in placemaking projects. And it's wonderful to talk to an architect who's just discovered libraries and has just discovered how great it would be to have a library in the centre of their new amazing development. So I would say that it's also a symbol, and funnily enough, real estate agents have said to me in the past that a new beautiful library puts house prices up.
Absolutely. Well, can I ask the panel, that's terrific if you're lucky enough to have one, but I'm sure there are people sitting in on this call going, God, I wish we had what Prospect has or what Salisbury's got, but we don't. So what are the opportunities for those regional and also metro public libraries that don't yet have the U building? What are the opportunities do we think that they can be exploring?
I mean, it doesn't have to be a huge investment. You don't have to build a whole new facility. It can be a very minor refurbishment that can really lift your facility, but it's also, I guess, thinking about your library service differently. I think traditionally local governments and councils have thought of a library as almost a side project or a particular function that sort of happens over there that the community loves, but there's not a lot of potential for other services to be provided out of that building. But the reality is the library brand is very strong within a community, and it can serve as a connector to all sorts of other services that the council provides, but that other sectors provide in that area. So you should be thinking about whether you can provide some of your business support services, for example, out of your library. Employment support, some of your community services, maybe the library's the go-to point that will give you those services exposure. You know, work with your libraries and you may be able to get more saturation and awareness for the other services that council provides as well.
Now, I know we have both councillors, we have elected members listening to this call, and we have people who are working within the library system. I wonder whether, who should lead that conversation, because I'm sure we don't all live in a perfect world, and I'm sure there are some councils that don't work as warmly and closely as they might with their council, their library team. Who needs to lead that conversation about better collaboration and better use of resources? Katherine, you brave enough?
Yeah, I think a lot of councils are aware of how important their libraries are to their communities. They're certainly the public face of councils to a lot of people. And I understand that libraries are the most visited public buildings in Australia. So, you know, if anything, as I said before, the COVID crisis has sort of highlighted to communities how much they value their libraries. So investment in libraries is, you know, money well spent. I think there's a lot of evidence of that on such a range of issues. And as I said, in the recovery process, libraries will only become more important. Things like access to internet, job seekers will need to access libraries, business opportunities as well. There's all kinds of things that libraries offer as part of the recovery. So yeah, there's a lot of evidence that money on libraries is well spent.
Leigh, could I mention that the best examples of investment I've seen is where you've got a local government CEO, a mayor and a library manager who come together and actually are on the same page and understand this. But I think also I've seen councillors, a group of councillors who've really thought about their legacy. I know that councillors stand for election basically because they want to give something back and they want to leave a legacy to the place that they're living in. There is no better legacy than a beautiful library.
Yeah, well, if you can get somebody to give you the funds, which is always the challenge, I think. Jo, I wanted to ask you, libraries have a really strong heritage and reputation amongst, as we've said, your known users. but do you sell that well enough? Does your council, does your marketing and comms team, do they sell it well enough?
I think we do, but there's always room for improvement. You touched on that before around your son and that core group of people who the perception is don't use library services. I have to say, I think it varies from area to area. At least in Salisbury, we don't look at just the membership to our library services. We definitely look at the use of the spaces, the people who are using our programs, and we make a real effort to connect with those different groups and target audiences. So what we find for that core group is they use the spaces. So some of the phone calls that we've had through COVID is, when are you open so I can come in and study? Of course, use the free Wi-Fi, but part of it is that coming in, because they may not have that opportunity to do that in their own home environment. So what we find in libraries as a whole, as a sector too, is that libraries sometimes come in and out of people's lives as they use the different types of services. And so there's different touch points for different people depending on why they want to use the services, how they use them. I think often the marketing around libraries has been around our collections, which is vital. It goes back to our core component of literacy and learning and lifelong education. But libraries are much more than just books. And I actually don't use the word books anymore. I use the word collections and access to information and collections, because that's almost a romantic notion of the way libraries used to be. So we've expanded over time, but marketing is key. There is a lot that we do behind the scenes that people are probably not really familiar with. I completely agree that we could market much better.
You raise an interesting point, and I'm crassly commercial. I run a small business. I'm happy to admit that. But one of the things that I think people don't necessarily know, and is a real opportunity in the post-COVID environment, is about your technology and the access that you can give. High-speed internet, all of those things. I think, again, crassly commercial. In terms of getting more bums on seats and more people in there, I would be pushing that really hard. What do you think, Jo?
We have a definite point of difference. We've talked for a long time about internet access, which is key. It's, again, what we require to run the services which we do and for the access. We've talked about the referral and online services already. Libraries are heavily involved in pushing the agenda of STEM and STEAM and maker spaces, which go to the agenda of education and jobs of the future. So what we can provide, and where we have always been cutting edge, is getting on the forefront of the technology and letting people experience it before they even have it in their own homes. So things like 3D printers, libraries had before, many other public services did, even education sector, which of course we work in collaboration with, but it's about that testing. It's around the community be familiar with this type of technology so they have the confidence to try things out, to explore that space. We run programs in partnership with commercial partners as well, like Microsoft. Salisbury runs something called Microsoft Bootcamp, which is micro-credentials. So a lot of what libraries and community centres do is a pathway to education and employment. So it's that first, I suppose you could call it a taste test of something that they might be interested in or curious about. So we always see it as an introduction that we hope people take further, and all those resources, equipment and access is available to them through public libraries.
Sorry, who's that? Oh, I think somebody's got their microphone open in the background. If you wouldn't mind muting it. I'm frantically looking for who it is. Ben, two words I like hearing together is cutting edge and libraries. What do you think are the opportunities? Because as we know, the workforce is going to look very different now. I'm spending half my time working from home. There are a lot of people who won't be coming back into the old office environment either by choice or because they won't have an option. Cutting edge, libraries, technology, where are the opportunities, do you think?
The most obvious one is something we've already touched on, and that's around place, which I think you're alluding to, Leigh. We can actually provide a place for people to come with high-speed internet to effectively conduct business. That's almost, and the old tagline that libraries have used for many years is about us being the third place in the community. We're not the workplace, we're not home, we are the third place that people can feel they can go. And certainly our new facility is an example of where people have taken up our open areas really quickly, and you'll see people setting up there for hours at a time, coffee next to them, either studying or no doubt conducting business, which a lot of people are choosing to do remotely or from their own homes now. So I think that is a huge opportunity. Some libraries are going as far, and councils are going as far as creating shared works environments. Gawler is an example of one that's most recently been completed. That is the ultimate extension of that, but often it's just open, bright areas with internet. I know it sounds very simplistic, that are welcoming, that are warm, but can actually be a really important service to our community. So I think that's a big opportunity there.
And also the access to government services. As we know, a lot of government services are going largely online or completely online. So having that access to government services through libraries is really important. That came out very strongly through the Hudson Howells report that you mentioned before, Leigh, too.
Yeah, I'll come back to that. I want to take you up on that, Ben, because I would not use the third space or place, because I don't like running third. I'd rather think of it as an alternative that you might not have thought about.
Yeah, we don't really use that term anymore, but I thought it was quite applicable to what I was talking about then. But yeah, we have left that tag behind.
Yeah, I think, you know, really now would be a really good time to raise the prospect of, you know, the working hub you might not have thought of. I think there's a whole conversation with a new audience that this is the perfect time you could potentially have.
Yeah, and I think that's going back to thinking of the library or a civic facility as being something that can actually deliver economic development goals to your community, which is not something that traditionally councils have thought about. But certainly probably in the last 5 years, if you look at the developments that have happened in South Australia, economic development has actually been a key consideration in those developments, and it has become a reality. And I guess that's something for councils who haven't or are starting to look at these sorts of projects, is that there's some really good case studies now and some clear success stories that they can draw on to look at doing the same for their communities, I suppose. So,
yeah, I think it changes the conversation when you can talk to, we're not just a repository, we're actually, you know, we drive dollars, because one of the reports talked about $2.80 of benefits for every dollar invested in libraries. $2.80 is generated for the South Australian community.
Yeah, well, and that goes back to even direct economic stimulus, and you certainly referred to suburbs being more desirable with a new library in them. Well, we've had that direct feedback where we've had customers say, I have chosen to, I've come from interstate, and I've chosen to move here to Prospect because of this building. And likewise, it has stimulated in our context development along Prospect Road. I mean, we've got a apartment building starting construction right next door to us right now. So that's real economic benefits, you know.
I want to discuss that further. Can I just interrupt though? I'm really glad there are people having a great time and enjoying the conversation. Can we tell whoever it is that there, is it?
Yeah, it was here at the LGA. We've sorted it out. Sorry about that, everyone.
Good. I'm glad that they'll be pleased to know it's been recorded too. Anyway, the report that came out earlier this month, which was the economic value of public libraries in South Australia, the numbers on that are pretty amazing. 253 million of annual benefits with 162 mil per annum in direct benefits. That changes the conversation, surely, Ben?
Yeah, so that is direct money into economies. So that could be library staff wages. It could be associated spending with people who are visiting their library facilities and then going for a coffee or a lunch afterwards. It's also about our collection spends and the money we pump into local economies to purchase stock for the library or technology or construction when we do new facilities as well. So there is a direct benefit, but there's also flow-on benefits, which we've already touched on too. So But yeah, as you mentioned, $2.80 really for every dollar that's invested at this moment in South Australia, which is really shows that they're a worthwhile investment in communities. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I know there are some fairly delicate funding discussions that will be coming up with the state government, but, you know, bear in mind, what is it? Local government provides what, more than 80% of the, well, more than 80% of the funding, and the state government throws in 12%. If there's ever been a time to go hard on selling your benefits, now would be the time to do it. Just as a word of advice.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are considering recovery from our current situation and thinking, well, what do we have to introduce to our communities to help them recover from this? Well, you don't have to introduce anything. There's already a facility that exists and a service model that exists in almost every community in Australia that is in the business of all of the basically identified areas that are important in the recovery from COVID-19. So if you invest in those facilities and services that already exist, your communities are going to recover that much quicker. We're here and we're ready to go, basically. And our relationships are established, our business models are established and successful. Our library brand is well known within our communities and resonates within our communities. I know there's sectors that are still maybe yet to understand what we do now, but we are here and we're ready to go, I guess is the message to those people who fund us. And to help, you know, we can make real and immediate impacts on the recovery of our communities if we have the resources.
I suppose one of the questions too, though, on the flip side of that, is how do you say to your teams working in libraries who are waiting for it to go back to normal that, you know, we don't actually want to go back to normal because this is a new opportunity? Is that fair?
Well, it is. Sorry, so you go.
Well, just speaking nationally, I can absolutely tell you that no one is expecting libraries to go back to the old normal.
Yeah.
And we are all working on what this looks like going forward. And I was actually talking to some bankers yesterday about the role of libraries potentially in financial literacy, because we're seeing more cashless transactions happening. We're having some really interesting conversations with people who are waking up to the role of libraries.
Thank you. Jo, I can see you nodding in furious agreement. What do you think?
Yes, absolutely. We know that the stimulus packages have already started. We also know that there's agencies such as Wellbeing SA, which is the breakaway from SA Health. So there's no doubt that our funding model will probably change, and it's something that we're looking to explore those opportunities. Where libraries are well placed, I completely agree with Ben and with Sue around our current model. We are the vehicle that can drive the stimulus that can aid in the recovery. So already we're looking at the partnerships and the funding opportunities where libraries are really well placed to drive whatever the agenda is from that particular department or that particular area within the economy. So our staff are flexible and adaptable. I think that's been proven through all of this COVID situation, in that the turnaround for our staff, as mentioned, I believe it was by Katherine, that they just very quickly jumped on board, and we're expecting to say, how do we help, not Sue, sorry, how do we help our communities? What can we do? We put the communities first before ourselves. So we, of course, worked with our internal partners to make sure that we were in line with the restrictions, clearly, but we were there for our communities, and very proudly could say that we were offering all these things already and will continue to do so.
A question for the panel. I know I've been fairly crass and commercial talking about, you know, benefits in terms of dollars, but we can't ever underestimate the impact that libraries have in terms of community resilience. And right now, our community is not feeling very resilient. Social isolation has really, I think, whacked a lot of people, you know, for a six. What can libraries do, and what are you doing to try and reach out to those people and say, come back in? Are there specific programs around wellness? You know, there's a lot of anxiety out there. You're the human face of government. What, Ben, I suppose to you, what can libraries be doing in terms of reaching out to people and saying, come back in and, you know, you're amongst friends?
Well, it's actually really basic. For one, we are open and welcoming, and we are a smiling face for anyone who walks through the door. We're a warm environment, and it's as basic as that, I suppose. And it goes back to what we were talking about libraries being a facility that for people, for everyone in the communities, and that it doesn't matter what your situation is, you are welcome in this building. And I suppose, and we haven't experienced a level of economic stress like this for a long period of time, but this is where these are the situations where libraries become extremely important to their communities. And we've essentially been very lucky that we haven't had to experience this sort of economic downturn. But really right now, I guess the message to library staff that might be listening is that there's actually never been a more important time in many of our lives, working lives, for us to get out of bed in the morning and get into work and be there behind that desk when those front doors open for our communities. This is where the rubber hits the road for library work. This is why we've all got into this business. And I guess that's just a little bit of a pep talk that this is it, you know, for the next 2 years, we are one of the most important things that are going to be happening in our communities and for individuals in our communities. And we need to take that role seriously.
Yeah, Ben, I think you raise a very good point to remind us that you know, this is a long tail out. You know, and if we look at what's happening in Victoria, unfortunately, at the moment, you know, just when you think things are starting to come through, we're not. So this is that's sort of a long game plan, which gives, I think, libraries an opportunity to really think about what they're doing, who they're doing it for, and how you're going to deliver it. Not in the, you know, the here and now, the next week, but as you say, next 2 years.
What we can do, Leigh.
Joe, sorry.
Sorry, Ben. What we can do, which local government is very well placed, is that we can inspire confidence in the community. We have a core level of service, and this is not just libraries, it's across all of local government. And we're well supported with our internal teams, and we have that very good relationship with the LGA and other government departments, and also with ALIA and nationally, to say this is what we can offer. We have the support from risk services, environmental health officers, WHS, to make sure the environments are controlled and they are safe and they are hygienic. We are in a place where having a civic building, we take all of those issues very seriously. So when we're looking at reintroduction of programs or services, we know that we have all the controls in place. Where I think we do have an opportunity though is to explain that to our community. So we do inspire that confidence. They feel like they can come back and use the services and make use of them. We are there for them where businesses around them unfortunately may have failed or not be operating to the same extent that they were prior to COVID. So we are that consistent message and voice to say that we are there for our communities. And we can do that also with our partners with state government, again on a national level, to say these are some of the programs you mentioned, wellbeing. Yeah. So when we look at all of those services, there's already the wellbeing that's been set up, at least in South Australia, that is being pushed, and that has very strongly come through libraries and has been for the last month or two.
Yeah, Ben?
No, Jo's articulated that very well, actually. I agree with what she said. I don't have anything to add to that.
Katherine, how important is it for this to be a really coordinated effort? I mean, we're lucky that it seems like there's a great relationship between the libraries and the LGA. How can you support them to move forward with, you know, some of these opportunities they've got in front of them?
Yeah, it is really important that we work together as a network, and we have been doing that, and we continue to do that very strongly with the library managers, with the LGA, and also with public library services. So that sort of unified system is really important for advocating for funding for libraries, and you know, we really value that relationship and those partnerships. going forward. I guess with things like marketing, there's always more that we can do to promote the wealth of activities that libraries do, and I think that will be one of the next steps. That we already do a lot of that, but that's one thing that working together as a sector, we can really try to bring in some of the parts of the community that might not know as much about libraries as we all do.
Yeah, absolutely. And now might be the time, because obviously there are different budgets across different, LGAs, but, one concerted and simple marketing push for all libraries. So everybody can get a piece of the pie with some shared and simple messaging. It strikes me the more I listen that there's a real opportunity. I mean, why have you not got me in there every week? Why is it, the 18-year-old son who just, Googled something and wouldn't think to go to a library? So I think that's a huge opportunity to not only support the existing market, but to actually say to some new people, it's not what you think.
I think also one of those things, a little bit like national parks, this came out through the Hudson House report too, is that a lot of people who don't use libraries still value them very highly and want them to be there. There might be parts of their lives that they have the opportunity to use libraries more, like you did when you had young children, or when people are older and retired, have more time. They want that facility to be available to them. They don't necessarily need to use every day to value it very highly.
Well, yeah, you have a fabulous brand, and when you have a nervous community looking for safety and somewhere warm and safe with friendly faces, now's the time to to really take advantage of that. Look, just in terms of closing, I've got a note here from Karen Redmond, who said, more than happy to show people around the fab new innovation hub in Gawler, which is adjacent to the refurbished library right in the centre of town. Investment brings success. We're seeing it here in Gawler, so that's great news. Obviously, Joe and certainly Ben, we're seeing the same thing. There's a different sense of vibrancy, isn't there, when you've got that? So any final thoughts or comments? Sue, what would you like to leave us with?
I'd just like to say that South Australian public libraries are the envy of the country, and particularly your one card system. So I think you're really well placed coming out of this. And the second thing is that I would suggest that you make libraries a focus for the community celebration as you pull out of COVID, because it's a place everyone goes, everyone knows. Focus the celebration on libraries.
Thanks, Sue. Joe, what about you? Some final words?
I think it would be fantastic if all the participants on this panel and more widely, or on this call, and more widely through the local government sector is really read those reports. We talked about the economic benefits, but one thing I'd like to highlight is the indirect benefits, which are much harder to measure in an economic sense. But it's about the social capacity, it's about equality, it's about disadvantage, it's about long-term health and educational benefits, which libraries provide, and we do that in conjunction throughout South Australia and nationally, but with our partners as well.
Absolutely. Katherine, sorry, some final thoughts.
Just that, I think we've shown through this webinar how important libraries are to councils and to the LGA, and how important they'll be in the recovery, and the LGA's role in supporting libraries through that process is really important.
Absolutely. Ben, final word to you. Certainly COVID-19 has thrown a lot of us a curveball, but hey, from your perspective, what a great opportunity.
Yeah, I think there's never been, I think one of the really interesting things out of this is actually we've almost had a default awareness campaign, which I think it might have been Katherine touched on, is that our customers have been really vocal about what they've missed about us while we've been closed, which I think has raised our profile within our communities and with our decision makers. So now's the time to build on that and really position ourselves and through avenues like this panel discussion to put our hand up and say we are effectively the answer to your community's recovery if you're willing to invest in us.
Possibly time to be a bit more bold, I think, is the message, and to keep on keeping on. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been lovely to have you on the panel. And just for those who missed the introduction, I've been asked, I'd like to thank Ben Footner, obviously the President of Public Libraries SA, and Manager of Library Services with the City of Prospect. Joe Cooper, the Manager Community Capacity at the City of Salisbury. Sue McKerracher, the CEO of ALIA, the Australian Library and Information Association. And last but never least, Katherine Russell, Senior Policy Officer with the LGA. And as I said, ladies and gents, just remember the entire conversation has been recorded. You'll find it on the LGA website. Look, I hope you found some of that interesting and certainly food for thought, given that we have libraries all over the state with different capacities. But again, as an outsider, I look at it and think, gee, what an opportunity. You've never been in the spotlight like this. Don't waste the opportunity. Go forth, as they say. Ladies and gentlemen, have a fabulous afternoon. Thank you, and hopefully I'll see you next week. Thanks. Cheers.
Oh, no, I wasn't doing that. I was replying to